My own mother looked right at me and whispered, "You are the biggest regret of our lives." I held her gaze and answered, "Consider me gone." I was 12 years old when I first realized I was just an unphotogenic prop for my parents' perfect public image. My mother, Adele, was a ruthless commercial real estate developer who viewed every human interaction as a transaction. My father, Whitmore, was a former state senator who treated public relations like a religion. They didn't want a quiet kid. They wanted a charismatic heir they could put on campaign mailers and country club brochures. Instead, they got me, a brooding teenager with a bad limp from a childhood bone infection, an obsession with agricultural law, and a face that never quite learned how to fake a smile for the cameras. For 28 years, I played along. I attended the elite prep schools they demanded, keeping my head down and my grades just high enough to avoid their wrath. I took the mindless administrative job at their holding company, sitting in a windowless office reviewing zoning permits and environmental impact report, while they paraded my flawless older brother, Ryan, around as the golden child. Ryan had the teeth, the hair, the firm handshake. I had the spreadsheet. The breaking point happened yesterday at 7:15 p.m. It was the grand opening of my parents' crowning achievement, the Valerius Estate. It was a sprawling luxury vineyard perched on the cliffs of Seneca Lake, designed to be the ultimate monument to the Callaway name. It was the kind of event where the appetizers, tiny pieces of Wagyu beef on truffle crostini, cost more than a used car, and the guests wore $1,000 leather shoes directly into the damp dirt. The local press was everywhere, snapping photos of local politicians and wealthy investors. The jazz band was playing something soft and rhythmic near the tasting room doors. The tension spiked when Adele stood on the main terrace to unveil the bronze founder's plaque. The microphone fed back for a second before she smoothed her designer blazer and announced to the crowd that she was transferring the entire estate's operational deed to Ryan. I wasn't angry. I actually hated the wine business. It was all vanity and fragile soil chemistry. But after the polite applause died down and the crowd began to mingle, she walked over to me. Her voice was dripping with venom, pitched perfectly so only the people immediately around us could hear. "Stop looking so miserable, Ethan," she sneered, loud enough for the local mayor to turn his head. "We all know you'd have bankrupted this place within a year pursuing some pathetic organic farming delusion." I didn't react. I just adjusted the lapels of my coat. "You've been a black mark on our legacy from day one," Whitmore chimed in, stepping up beside her. His eyes were full of undisguised contempt, the kind he usually reserved for reporters asking about his campaign finances. "A constant embarrassment. We only invited you today to keep the local tabloids from asking questions." Then my mother delivered the final blow. She leaned in close, her champagne flute held delicately in her left hand, her face twisted in pure disgust. "Sometimes when the cameras are off, your father and I agree," she said, her voice slicing through the cool evening air. "You are the biggest regret of our lives." The entire tasting room went completely still. I could hear the wind coming off the lake, rustling the decorative oak trees. I could see a caterer drop a tray of glasses in shock, the crystal shattering against the stone patio. Ryan just stood there, swirling his wine, smirking as he checked his heavy silver watch. No one stepped in to defend me. Not one of the board members. Not one of the politicians whose campaigns my father had bankrolled. I didn't yell. I didn't storm off. A deep, absolute calm settled into my bones. It was the calm of a man who had known this exact moment was coming for years. I set my glass down on the marble bar. The clinking sound echoed loudly in the quiet room. I stood tall, ignoring the familiar ache in my left leg, and looked her right in the eye. "Consider me gone," I said. My voice was steady, hollow, and completely devoid of the deference they were used to. "Move forward as if Ethan was never part of this family." Whitmore let out a dry, condescending laugh. "Oh, dramatic as always. And where exactly will you go? You live in the downtown condo we own. You're strictly on our payroll." I offered a tight, ruthless smile. It was the expression of someone who had locked in a checkmate 3 months ago. "Actually, Dad, I vacated the condo last Tuesday. The keys are taped to your office door." I reached into my battered leather briefcase, the one they always told me looked too cheap for a Callaway to carry, pulled out a heavy manila folder, and dropped it onto the tasting bar. It knocked over an open bottle of their premium vintage. Dark red wine spilled across the pristine white marble, dripping onto the floorboard. "What is this garbage?" Adele hissed, recoiling as the wine splashed near her shoes. "That," I replied, "is a certified cashier's check for exactly $218,400. It covers every dime you've wasted on my existence since I was legally an adult, adjusted for inflation. It cleared your private account at 9 a.m. this morning." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the wealthy elite who had pitied me for decades. I wanted them to hear this. "More importantly," I continued, tapping the thick stack of papers inside the folder, "that contains the finalized deeds I secured last week. You see that agricultural delusion? I used my savings to quietly buy the 400 acres surrounding this entire estate. That includes the only commercial access road, and more crucially, the municipal water rights to this entire side of the lake." Adele's smug expression evaporated. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. You can't have," Whitmore choked out, stepping back as if the folder was going to bite him. "I can, and I did. I own the ground under your main pipe. I completely control the water that feeds your precious vine." I leaned in, dropping my voice to a harsh whisper that still carried in the silent room. "I'm vanishing from your world, exactly like you asked. But every time you try to water these fields, every time you try to run a delivery truck up that hill, you're going to remember that your entire legacy depends on the son you wish you never had." I turned to my brother, who had stopped swirling swirling his wine. The smirk was entirely gone from his face. Good luck with the harvest, Ryan. I didn't wait for a response. I turned my back on them and walked out the heavy glass doors of the tasting room. The crisp night air hit my face, smelling of damp soil and crushed grapes. I walked across the gravel parking lot, past the rows of imported luxury cars, until I reached my 10-year-old Subaru. I got in, turned the key, and drove down Assess Road, my access road, leaving the Valerius estate in the rearview mirror. The drive back to town was quiet. No radio, just the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, a physical unwinding of tension that had been coiled around my ribs since childhood. But I wasn't naive. I had worked in the back offices of Callaway Holdings long enough to know how my mother operated. She didn't take defeat. She didn't accept checkmates. She flipped the board. I pulled into the parking lot of the cheap garden-style apartment complex I had leased a month ago under an LLC. It was a far cry from the glass-walled downtown condo. The exterior stucco was peeling, and the security light by the stairs hummed with a failing ballast. It was perfect. It was mine. I spent the next morning unpacking boxes of books, mostly texts on water conservation laws, property zoning, and agricultural rights. My phone had been ringing off the hook since 8 a.m. I had blocked my parents and Ryan, but the calls were coming from the Callaway Holdings switchboard, from various board members, and from numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail. At 11:30 a.m., a text came through from a number I hadn't blocked. Pick up. It's Emery. Emery was the senior legal counsel for Callaway Holdings. He was a sharp, pragmatic guy in his 50s who had always treated me with a baseline level of respect, mostly because I was the only one in the family who actually read the contract he drafted. I stared at the screen for a moment, then tapped the call button. He answered on the first ring. Where are you? Emery asked. His voice was tight, lacking its usual easy drawl. I don't work for you anymore, Emery. My location isn't company business. He let out a heavy sigh. Ethan, listen to me. Your mother was in the office at 6 this morning. She was screaming at the acquisitions team, throwing binders. She fired 2 junior analysts before the coffee was even brewed. Sounds like a typical Wednesday for Adele. Don't play games with me, kid, Emery snapped. I saw the deed copies you left. It's airtight work. Honestly, I'm impressed. But you just backed a cornered animal into a cage with her favorite child. She's not going to just buy water from you at a premium. She's pulling in the big gun. Let her, I said, leaning against my cheap laminate kitchen counter. The county records are stamped. The transaction is final. The previous owner of those 400 acres hated my father's guts anyway, which is why he sold them to me for pennies on the dollar under a blind trust. There's nothing to litigate. You think Adele cares about what's legal? Emery said, his voice dropping an octave. She just got off a conference call with a litigation firm in the city. They aren't going after the sale. They're going after the zoning. I frowned, setting my coffee mug down. The land is zoned agricultural, has been for 60 years, and your mother is petitioning the county planning board to rezone your parcels as high-density commercial development due to their proximity to her estate. If she gets that reclassification pushed through, your agricultural water rights get overridden by municipal utility mandate. She's going to argue that your control of the reservoir is a public utility hazard. I rubbed my temples. It was a vicious strategy. If the land got rezoned commercial, I would be subjected to commercial property taxes, which I absolutely could not afford, and the county could claim eminent domain over the water access to service the new commercial district. She doesn't have the grounds for that, I said, though my stomach tightened. I have active plans to farm that land. Do you have a tractor, Ethan? Do you have seeds in the ground? Emery asked flatly. Because right now, you have 400 acres of dirt and a law degree you never used. She has the county commissioner on speed dial. I'm telling you this because I like you, and because I think what they did to you is foul. But you need to lawyer up, not a real estate eye, a litigator, someone who fights dirty. Thanks, Emery. Don't thank me. Just brace yourself. She wants to ruin you. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. The quiet victory of last night was evaporating, replaced by the cold machinery of Callaway Holdings gearing up for war. I needed representation. I opened my laptop and started searching, bypassing the sleek downtown firms that my father had in his pocket. I looked for the strip mall lawyers, the scrappy defenders who sued the city over pothole damage and handled messy local disputes. I found a woman named Ren Drent. Her office was above a dry cleaner on the industrial side of town. I called her, told her I had a zoning dispute involving the Valerius estate, and she told me to be there in 20 minutes. Ren's office smelled like stale coffee and pressing fluid from the cleaners below. She was in her late 30s, wearing a faded cardigan, her desk buried under stacks of manila folders. When I handed her my copies of the deed, she didn't say a word for 10 minutes. She just read, occasionally tapping a cheap ballpoint pen against her teeth. You really bought the bottleneck, Ren finally said, looking up at me. Every drop of water going to those vines has to cross your property line. It's a beautiful chokehold. My mother is moving to rezone the land to commercial to break the hold, I said. She wants to force eminent domain on the access road and the pipe. Ren tossed the pen onto the desk. Of course she is. Adele Callaway doesn't pay tolls. She paves over the toll booth. If they rezone you, your property taxes will skyrocket from $3,000 a year to something like $40,000. Can you pay that? No, I admitted. I drained my accounts to buy the land. Then we have to block the rezoning. To do that, we have to prove to the county board that your land is actively, undeniably agricultural. You can't just hold it as a spike drip. Ren leaned forward, resting her elbows on the messy desk. Ethan, you need to plant something. Immediately. And you need to show commerce. I don't have the capital for a massive planting operation. It doesn't have to be massive. It just has to be legitimate, she said. Find a fast yield crop. Get some local local hands. Sell it at a farmer's market if you have to. But if the county inspector drives by next week and sees empty dirt, Adele wins. I left Ren's office with a headache and a ticking clock. I had 5 days before the preliminary zoning hearing. When I pulled back into my apartment complex, I saw a familiar silver Porsche parked out front, taking up 2 spaces. Ryan was leaning against the hood, wearing a cashmere sweater, looking entirely out of place next to the overflowing dumpsters of my building. I parked my Subaru a few spots down and walked toward him. I didn't say a word. I just stopped a few feet away and waited. Nice place, Ryan said, looking up at the peeling stucco. Really fits the whole man of the earth vibe you're going for. What do you want, Ryan? He sighed, dropping the arrogant smirk. He suddenly looked tired, older than his 30 years. Mom is out of her mind, Ethan. She's ripping the company apart. Dad is drinking before noon. The investors from New York are calling, asking why the water supply for a $50 million vineyard is suddenly tied up in a family feud. It's not a feud. It's a business transaction. They want water. They can negotiate a lease with the landowner. Me. Come on, man. Ryan, please stay closer. You made your point. You humiliated them in front of everyone. It was a great show. But this is my inheritance you're messing with. The deed to Valerius is in my name now. If the vines die, I'm the one holding the bag, not them. Then you should be the one negotiating the water lease. I can't, Ryan snapped, his voice cracking slightly. Mom froze my account. She said until this is fixed, I don't get a dime of operational budget. She's holding my neck to the fire because of what you did. I looked at my brother. For a second, a very brief second, I felt a flicker of sympathy. He was just as trapped by them as I had been, only his cage was gilded. But then I remembered the smirk on his face the night before. I remembered how he checked his watch while our mother told me I was a regret. Ryan didn't want peace. He just wanted his easy life back. You're the golden boy, Ryan, I said softly. Figure it out. I turned to walk up the stairs to my apartment. I know about the rezoning petition, Ethan, Ryan called out behind me. I stopped on the second step. Mom isn't just going to rezone you. She found something in the soil reports from when the previous owner had the land. I turned back around. What are you talking about? Ryan gave a tight, humorless smile. You bought the land blind to keep it a secret, right? You didn't do a full environmental phase 2 study. Mom did back when she was trying to buy it 3 years ago. There's an old underground diesel storage tank on the North Ridge from a logging operation in the 70s. It's leaking. My stomach dropped. If she tips off the Department of Environmental Conservation, Ryan continued, his voice steady now, they won't just rezone you. They'll condemn the land until it's remediated. Do you have $250,000 to dig up contaminated soil, Ethan? He let the question hang in the damp evening air. Drop the deed, grant the easement, Ryan said, turning back to his Porsche. Or Mom is going to bury you in toxic waste. He opened the driver's side door of his Porsche, the heavy mechanical click echoing off the brick facade of my cheap apartment building. He slid into the cream leather seat, pulled the door shut, and started the engine. It roared to life with a low, aggressive purr. He backed out without looking at me again. I watched his taillights shrink down the street until they were swallowed by the intersection at the corner. I stood there for a long time. The security light buzzed above my head. A stray cat darted under the dumpsters, toxic waste. I walked up the stairs to my apartment, my bad leg throbbing from the damp night air. I unlocked the door, walked straight to the kitchen counter, and picked up my phone. It was almost 9 o'clock. I didn't care. I found Ren Drent's number from the call log and dialed. She answered on the 4th ring. There was the sound of a television in the background, the low drone of a baseball game, and the clinking of dishes in a sink. It's 9 at night, Ethan, she said. Her voice was flat, tired. My hourly rate doubles after dinner. My brother just paid me a visit, I said. I leaned my weight against the refrigerator. Adele isn't just going for the rezoning. She's threatening to call the Department of Environmental Conservation. Ryan says there's an old leaking diesel storage tank on the north ridge of my property from a logging operation in the 70s. The clinking of dishes stopped. The television was muted. Are you kidding me? Ren asked. The exhaustion was gone from her voice, replaced by a sharp professional edge. Did you not get a Phase 1 environmental report when you bought the land? I bought it under a blind trust through a Shell LLC so my mother wouldn't find out, I said, rubbing the bridge of my nose. I bypassed the standard inspections to close in 7 days. The seller was highly motivated. Now I know why. Ren let out a long, heavy exhale. Ethan, you bought a commercial property without an environmental assessment. That's not just a rookie mistake, that's financial suicide. If the DEC gets involved and finds a leaking underground storage tank, they will mandate immediate remediation. You're the current owner on the deed. The liability falls on you first. We're talking soil excavation, groundwater testing, monitoring wells, $200,000 minimum. If it hit the water table, double it. I don't have it. Then the state places a lien on the property, condemns it until it's clean, and auctions it off for recover costs, Ren said bluntly. And guess who will be waiting at the county auction with a fat checkbook? It'll. Exactly. It's a squeeze play. She doesn't even need the rezoning petition if she can drown you in environmental fine. Ren paused, and I could hear her tapping a pen against a hard surface. How does your mother know about the tank? Ryan said she tried to buy the land 3 years ago. She did a Phase 2 study back then, found the tank, and I'm guessing she used it to try and lowball the owner. He hated my father, so he refused to sell to her at any price. Wait, Ren said, her voice dropping. She found a leaking commercial tank 3 years ago and didn't report it to the DEC? Apparently not. She just kept the report in her back pocket. Okay, that's a wedge, Ren muttered, more to herself than to me. If she knew about a hazard threatening the local watershed and concealed it, we might be able to drag her into the liability pool. But it's a massive gamble. We need to see what's actually in the ground. You need to get out to that North Ridge tomorrow morning. Do not dig anything up. Just look. See if there's a vent pipe, a fill cap, dead vegetation, anything. And the planting, I asked? The deadline for the zoning board? You still need a crop in the ground. Yesterday. The environmental threat only works if she pulls the trigger. The zoning board is a guaranteed bullet coming your way on Tuesday. Plant something fast, Ethan. And pray the soil isn't already poisoned. I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my small kitchen table with a legal pad, calculating costs. Seed, fertilizer, labor, equipment rental. I was looking at $10,000 just to make a dent in 400 acres. I had exactly $1,200 in my checking account. At 5 a.m., I drove out of town, heading away from the lake and into the deep rural pockets of the county. I was looking for Holt. Holt was a third-generation farmer who owned a massive stretch of soybeans and feed corn near the county line. I only knew him because 3 years ago, Callaway Holdings had tried to bully him into selling an easement through his lower pastures for a new housing development. They sent me to deliver the final offer. Holt had taken one look at the contract, bit a stream of tobacco juice on my expensive leather shoes, and told me to get off his land before he released the dog. I actually respected him for it. I pulled my Subaru up his long dirt driveway just as the sun was breaking over the horizon. The farmhouse was weathered, the paint peeling off the porch column. A massive rusted metal barn stood out back, flanked by 3 massive John Deere tractors. Holt was sitting on the porch step, lacing up a pair of heavy work boots. He was a broad, tough man in his 60s with skin like cured leather and a thick gray beard. He stopped lacing his boot and watched me park. I got out of the car. I wore jeans and a plain work shirt, leaving the Callaway suits in the closet. I walked up to the porch, keeping a respectful distance. "You're Whitmore's kid," Holt said. His voice was like gravel in a cement mixer, the one with the limp. "Ethan," I said. "I remember what your name is. I also remember what happened to your shoes last time you came up my drive." Holt stood up, wiping his hands on his denim overalls. "If you're here with another eminent domain threat, I've got a shotgun inside that says you can't read a property line. I don't work for my father anymore. I don't work for Callaway Holding." Holt narrowed his eyes. "That's so? Then what are you doing here before the roosters are awake?" "I bought the 400 acres surrounding the Valerius estate," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I control the access road and the water rights to my mother's new vineyard." Holt stared at me for a long, silent moment. Then, very slowly, a slow, grim smile cracked across his weathered face. "You bought the bottleneck. I bought the bottleneck. And now they're trying to rezone my land commercial to force me out. I need an agricultural presence, and I need it by Tuesday. I need to plant," Holt snorted, shaking his head. "Boy, you can't plant 400 acres in 3 days. Not without a fleet. And certainly not in May with no soil prep. I don't need all 400. I need 20. Visible from the main road. Fast germinating cover crop. Buckwheat, winter rye, radishes, I don't care. I need tractors on my dirt, and I need receipts showing I paid a local agricultural contractor for seed and labor." Holt reached into his pocket and pulled out a tin of chewing tobacco. He packed his lip thoughtfully, looking past me at my cheap car. 20 acres of buckwheat," Holt muttered. "Need 2 tractors. Discs to break the hardpan seed drills. Seed is cheap, but my diesel ain't, and neither is my time. Cost you 15,000. I don't have 15 of Thuman." Holt bit into the dirt. "Then you don't have a crop. I ain't running a charity for disgruntled rich kids." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the heavy gold Rolex my father had given me when I graduated college. I had never liked it. It was ostentatious and heavy, a constant physical reminder of the debt I owed them. But it was a Daytona. It retailed for $22,000. I tossed it. It arched through the morning air and landed perfectly in Holt's large, calloused palm. He looked down at it, tracing the fluted bezel with a thick thumb. "It's real," I said. "Keep it as collateral. Once the harvest comes in, or once I lease the water rights to someone who isn't my mother, I'll pay you the 15 in cash. If I fail, you sell the watch. You'll clear 20 easy." Holt held the watch up to the rising sun, watching the light catch the gold. He looked at me, really looked at me, seeing the bags under my eyes and the rigid way I was holding my bad leg. "I always hated your mother," Holt said quietly. "She paved over the Miller farm in '08. Good soil. Now it's a strip mall with a vape shop and a dying grocery store." He pocketed the watch. "I'll have my boys load the seed drills. We meet at your property line in 2 hours. You point to where you want the dirt turned." I thanked him and got back in my car. I drove straight to the north ridge of my new property. The land here was wilder, heavily wooded with pine and scrub oak, sloping sharply downward toward the lake. This was the buffer zone, the ugly wilderness my parents had tried to hide behind a row of imported Italian cypresses. I parked the Subaru on the shoulder of the county road and pushed my way through the brush. I spent an hour walking the grid. My leg was screaming in protest by the time I found it. It was tucked behind a dense thicket of blackberry brambles, in a slight depression in the earth where the runoff from the hill pooled. The ground was unnaturally soft here. No grass grew, just dead black soil. And right in the center of the depression, protruding maybe 4 inches from the dirt, was a rusted iron pipe with a heavy hexagonal cap, a vent line. I knelt down in the dirt. The smell was faint, but it was there. The unmistakable, greasy metallic scent of old diesel fuel. Ryan hadn't been bluffing. Adele hadn't been bluffing. There was a bomb buried under my feet. I took out my phone and snapped a dozen photos of the pipe, the dead soil, and the surrounding trees. Then I noticed something else. About 20 yards away, partially obscured by dead leaves, was a small plastic marker flag. The wire was rusted, but the neon pink plastic was still intact. It was the kind of flag surveyors use. I walked over and pulled away the leaf. Underneath the flag was a PVC monitoring well, capped and padlocked. It looked relatively new, maybe 3 years old. Adele hadn't just done a study. She had installed testing wells. That meant there was a paper trail somewhere. A contracting firm had drilled this. A lab had tested the water. Someone had a file on this exact spot. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Ren. "Are you at the property?" she asked immediately. "I'm on the North Ridge. Found the tank. Found a vent pipe. The soil is dead around it. Smells like a gas station." "Damn it," Ren breathed. "It gets better. There's a monitoring well installed nearby. Capped and locked." My mother didn't just test the soil. She monitored the groundwater. "There has to be a firm in the city that did the drilling. Can we subpoena their record? If we know who they are, yes. But Ethan, if the well is there, it means she knows exactly how far the plume has spread. If it reached the aquifer that feeds the lake, the state will step in before we can even file a motion. We need to find out who drilled that well, and we need to do it without tipping off Callaway Holdings." "Leave that to me," I said. "I spent 7 years in their administrative office. I know how they code their invoices. Just be careful. You're poking a bear that already wants to eat you." I hung up just as the low, heavy rumble of diesel engines shook the morning air. Down on the lower flat, near the main access road, Holt's 2 massive green tractors were pulling off the county highway. I hiked back down the hill. By the time I reached the bottom, Holt was already directing his son to drop the heavy steel disc into the dirt. "Where do you want it?" Holt yelled over the roar of the engines. "Right here." I pointed to the 20 acres that sat directly adjacent to the pristine, manicured entrance of the Valerius estate. "I want it loud, I want it dusty, and I want it highly visible." Holt grinned, revealing a row of crooked teeth. He signaled his son. The tractor surged forward, the heavy steel disc biting into the hardpan dirt. A massive cloud of dust kicked up into the air, drifting lazily over the stone walls of my parents' vineyard, settling on the glossy leaves of their prize-winning grape. It was a beautiful sight. I left Holt to the planting and drove back into town. I needed a shower, and then I needed to commit a felony. When I worked at Callaway Holdings, I was the administrative catch-all. I reviewed permit, managed the physical archives, and occasionally handled vendor disputes. Because my parents considered me an embarrassment, they kept me away from the client-facing operations, burying me in the basement with the servers and the filing cabinet. It was a mistake. They thought they were hiding me. They were actually giving me the keys to the kingdom. I knew that every piece of vendor correspondence, every invoice, and every environmental report was backed up on a localized legacy server. My mother didn't trust cloud storage. She liked things physical, tangible, under her direct control. I parked 3 blocks away from the Callaway Holdings building. It was a sleek glass-fronted mid-rise in the center of town. It was Saturday afternoon. The executive floors would be empty, but the security desk in the lobby was staffed 24/7. I walked to the rear alley. There was a service entrance used by the cleaning crews. I pulled my old keycard from my wallet. My father said I was off the payroll, but I knew the IT department, run by a guy named Soren who spent 90% of his day playing online chess, was notoriously slow at revoking access credentials on weekends. I swiped the card, the light flashed green. The heavy steel door clicked open. I slipped inside, walking down the familiar sterile hallway toward the basement archive. The air smelled of ozone and floor wax. I moved quickly, my limp slowing me down but not stopping me. I reached the archive room, swiped the card again, green light. The room was vast, filled with rolling high-density storage rack. In the corner sat the legacy terminal, a dusty Dell computer hooked directly into the internal network. I sat down, booted it up, and logged in using my old administrative credentials. I was in. I opened the vendor database and set the search parameters to 3 years ago, filtering for environmental consulting firms, drilling contractors, and hydrology lab. I found a cluster of invoices from a firm called Apex Environmental based out of Syracuse. They had billed Callaway Holdings for Phase 2 subsurface investigation and well installation. I clicked on the attached PDF report. It was 70 pages long. I scrolled to the executive summary. The tank was a 10,000-gallon steel vessel, completely corroded. It had been leaking diesel for at least 20 years. The soil was saturated, but the worst part was the groundwater data. The contaminant plume had migrated southward, following the slope of the bedrock. It hadn't hit the lake, but it had migrated under the property line. The plume was actively sitting beneath the northernmost block of vines on the Valerius estate. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. Adele hadn't just hidden a toxic hazard on my land. She had built a $50 million luxury vineyard directly on top of the contaminated groundwater. If the deck found out, they wouldn't just condemn my property. They would shut down the entire Valerius estate. They would recall the wine. The Callaway legacy would be synonymous with toxic waste. This wasn't just leverage. This was a nuclear bomb. I hit the print button, sending the document to the local printer in the corner of the room. The machine whirred to life. Suddenly, the heavy door to the archive room slammed open. I jumped, spinning around in the cheap office chair. Standing in the doorway, holding a half-empty cup of coffee, was Emery, the senior legal counsel. He was wearing weekend clothes, a faded polo and khakis, but his eyes were just as sharp as ever. He looked at me. He looked at the printer spitting out pages. "Ethan," Emery said quietly. He closed the door behind him, locking it from the inside. "I really hoped you were smarter than this." I didn't move. The printer in the corner kept grinding away, spitting out page after page of the Phase 2 report. The rhythmic shriek of the feed rollers felt deafening in the small, locked room. Emery walked slowly toward the desk, his eyes flicking from the glowing monitor to the stack of paper forming on the output tray. He looked exhausted. The deep lines around his mouth were sharper under the harsh fluorescent lights of the basement. "Corporate espionage, Ethan," he asked, keeping his voice low. "You're 30 seconds away from a felony trespassing charge. If I call security right now, you leave this building in handcuffs." "My keycard still works, Emery," I said, pointing to the plastic badge resting next to the keyboard. Soren Initever deactivated my profile. I'm legally accessing a server I still have credentialed clearance for. It's a gray area, and you know it. Emery rubbed his jaw. The company suspended you. You have no business being here. I'm not here for business. I'm here for survival. I reached over, grabbed the executive summary off the top of the printer tray, and held it out to him. My mother is going to use an environmental hazard to steal my land and ruin me. I came to see what she was holding over my head. Emery hesitated, then took the paper. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his shirt pocket and slid them onto his face. I watched his eyes scan the text. For the first few seconds, his expression was a mask of practiced corporate neutrality. Then, he reached the section on the groundwater migration. He stopped reading. He read the paragraph again. Slowly, the color began to drain from his face. She didn't tell you, did she? I asked softly. Emery lowered the paper. He looked at me, and for the first time in the 15 years I had known him, the sharp, unflappable senior counsel looked genuinely rattled. I drafted the environmental disclosures for the Valerius Estate zoning permits 2 years ago, Emery said, his voice barely more than a whisper. She gave me a clean Phase 1 report. She never showed me this Phase 2. She never told me they installed monitoring wells, because if she did, you would have been legally obligated to report the migrating plume to the county water authority, I said. And the county would have denied the permits for a $50 million vineyard. She built her crowning achievement directly on top of a toxic aquifer. Emery looked back at the paper. His hands were trembling slightly. As the general counsel for Callaway Holdings, his signature was on every state and federal application for that estate. Adele hadn't just risked the company. She had exposed Emery to severe professional and criminal liability. He could be disbarred for this. He could go to prison. The printer fell silent. The last page slid into the tray. I was never here, Emery said. His voice was suddenly tight, stripped of all its usual warmth. Emery, I said I was never here, he repeated, stepping back toward the door. I came down to the archives to pull an old file on the Miller zoning case. The room was empty. I didn't see anyone. I certainly didn't see you printing highly confidential, devastating documents. He reached behind him, unlocked the heavy steel door, and pulled it open. He didn't look at me again as he walked out, the heavy soles of his loafers echoing down the hallway. I gathered the 70 pages, shoved them into my briefcase, and left through the service exit. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Ren Drent's office. The smell of pressing fluid from the dry cleaner downstairs was giving me a headache, but I didn't care. I slapped a thick stack of paper onto her messy desk. Ren picked it up. She read the summary much faster than Emery had. When she finished, she tossed it back onto the desk and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. Well, she said, you weren't kidding. Your mother is a sociopath. Can we use it to stop the rezoning petition, I asked. Ren sat forward, resting her elbows on the desk. Ethan, this is way past a zoning dispute. This is a suicide pact. If you take this to the Department of Environmental Conservation, they will immediately condemn your 400 acres to contain the source of the leak. You will lose your land, and the state will fine you into oblivion for cleanup costs as the current title holder. But they'll also shut down the Valerius estate, I said. Yes, they will test the vines, find the groundwater contamination, and bulldoze your mother's legacy into the dirt. It's mutually assured destruction. Ren tapped her pen against the desk. Are you willing to go bankrupt just to take her down with you? No, I said instantly. I don't want to destroy the land. I want to farm it. I just need leverage to make her back off. Then we don't go to the state, Ren said. We go to the board. Your mother is stubborn, but her investors aren't. They care about their return, not her ego. If they find out she built their investment on a toxic liability, they'll force her to settle with you to keep this quiet. They'll make her pay for a quiet, voluntary remediation of the tank on your land, and they'll drop the rezoning petition. My mother controls the board, I pointed out. She handpicked most of them. Not all of them, Ren said, pulling a yellow legal pad toward her. Who is the anchor investor for the Valerius project? The one with the deepest pocket. Cora Wyndham, I said. She's old money from Boston. She put up $20 million in mezzanine financing to get the tasting room and the main production facility built. She doesn't like my mother, but she likes the profit margins. Then Cora Wyndham is our target, Ren said, scribbling the name down. We bypass Adele. We bypass your father. We take this report directly to Cora. We show her the gun pointed at her $20 million, and we let her hold your mother's feet to the fire. It made sense. It was clean. It removed the emotional volatility of dealing with my parents. I'll find her tomorrow, I said. I spent the rest of Saturday and all of Sunday out at the land. Holt and his son had worked fast. 20 acres of tough, rocky dirt had been turned over, smoothed, and drilled with buckwheat seed. It wasn't a full farm, but it looked like one. The tractor tracks were deep and visible from the road. The receipts for the seed and labor were sitting on my kitchen counter, ready for the zoning board on Tuesday. Monday morning at 8 a.m., I parked outside the Wyndham Trust building in the financial district. Cora Wyndham didn't take walk-ins. She existed behind layers of receptionists, executive assistants, and private security, but I knew her routine. Every Monday at 8:45 a.m., she had breakfast at a small, ridiculously expensive French cafe across the street from her office. I waited at a corner table nursing a black coffee. At exactly 8:40, Cora walked in. She was a tall, imposing woman in her 60s, wearing a sharp-tailored suit and a silk scarf. She ordered a cortado and a croissant at the counter and took a seat near the window. I picked up my briefcase, walked over, and sat down directly across from her. Cora looked up from her phone. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Ethan Callaway, she said, her voice smooth and unbothered. I heard you made quite the exit at the tasting room the other night. Dramatic. A bit tacky for my taste, but I suppose your mother brings that that out in people. I apologize for the interruption, Cora. I need 3 minutes of your time. You have one, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. And if this is about you begging for a job because Whitmore cut you off, you can leave now. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. I slid it across the small marble table. I bought the 400 acres surrounding the Valerius estate, I said. My mother is trying to force me out by rezoning my land and threatening me with an environmental hazard she found on the property, an old diesel tank. Cora looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. Real estate disputes between you and your mother are not my concern, Ethan. I finance wine. I don't referee family therapy. You'll want to read the executive summary, Cora, because that tank has been leaking for decades. The groundwater plume migrated south. I paused, letting the weight of the word settle in the quiet cafe. It's currently sitting in the bedrock directly beneath the Valerius estate. Cora's hand stopped halfway to her cup. She slowly lowered it back to the saucer. She picked up the envelope, broke the seal, and pulled out the first 5 pages of the report. I watched her read. Like Emery, Cora didn't look horrified. She looked cold, calculating. Her eyes scanned the data, processed the liability, and immediately started working the angle. When she finished, she slid the papers back into the envelope and folded her hands on the table. Does anyone else have this? She asked. Just my attorney and my mother's former environmental contractor, though I imagine Adele paid them a premium to lose their copy. What do you want, Ethan? I want the rezoning petition dropped before the hearing tomorrow, I said. I want a guaranteed commercial easement for my access road, and I want Callaway Holdings to fund the environmental cleanup on my ridge through a quiet, private remediation firm so the state never has to get involved. In exchange, I sign a water lease agreement for the vineyard at fair market value, and I bury this report forever. Cora studied me. She looked out the window at the morning traffic, then back at me. No, she said simply. I blinked. No, a deal is reckless, and this proves she is a liability, Cora said, her tone entirely conversational. But your terms are unacceptable. You want me to force Callaway Holdings to spend $500,000 cleaning up your dirt, just so you can turn around and charge us a premium for water access in perpetuity. That is a terrible deal for my bottom line. If you don't take the deal, I go to the deck, I said, my voice hardening. They condemn my land, and they shut down your $20 million investment. Cora smiled. It was a thin, bloodless smile. No, you won't. I know exactly how much money you have, Ethan. I know you drained your accounts to buy that land. If the deck steps in, you are personally liable for the initial containment costs because your name is on the deed. You'll be bankrupt before the state even gets around to testing our vine. She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a sleek silver pen, and wrote a number on a napkin. She slid it across the table. $300,000. I am offering you a buyout, Cora said. $300,000 for the 400 acres. It covers what you paid the previous owner, plus a little extra for whatever cheap lawyer you hired to review this mess. You sign the deed over to Wyndham Trust by 5 o'clock today. You want the land for yourself. I want control of the bottleneck, Cora corrected. Adele proved she can't be trusted to secure the logistics of this operation. So I will own the water, I will own the access road, and I will force Adele to pay me the lease fees. I will also handle the cleanup quietly, using my own contractors. I stared at the napkin. 300 grand. It was a lifeline. It would get me out of the crossfire. But it meant surrendering everything I had built, everything I had risked, straight to another corporate shark who viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to be bought off. And if I say no? I asked. If you say no, Cora said, finishing her coffee and standing up, I will personally fund Adele's legal war chest. I will hire 3 separate environmental firms to anonymously report your leaking tank to the state by noon today. I will let the deck crush you into absolute insolvency. And when your land goes up for county auction, I will buy it for 50 cents on the dollar. She picked up her handbag and looked down at me. You thought you were playing chess with your mother, Ethan, but you just walked onto my board. You have until 5 o'clock. She walked out of the cafe, leaving the envelope and the napkin on the table. I sat there for a long time. The jazz music playing quietly in the cafe suddenly felt like nails on a chalkboard. I had tried to outmaneuver Adele by finding a rational actor, but I had forgotten the cardinal rule of my parents' world. Rational didn't mean fair. It just meant ruthless in a different direction. I picked up the napkin, crumpled it in my fist, and walked out to my car. I needed to talk to Ren. I needed to figure out if there was any way to block Cora from triggering a deck investigation. I drove back toward the industrial side of town, my mind racing through legal loopholes that probably didn't exist. My phone vibrated in the center console. It was Holt. I answered it on speaker. Holt, I'm dealing with a crisis right now. Can I call you? You need to get out here, Holt interrupted. His gravelly voice was tight. Right now. What's wrong? Did the tractor break an axle? Word, Holt said. I'm sitting in my truck at the top of your ridge. 2 white SUVs just pulled onto the shoulder down by the access road. Government plate. 3 guys in high-vis vests are pulling soil testing augers out of the trunk. My blood turned to ice. The deck? Looks like it, Holt said. Cora, I muttered, gripping the steering wheel. She hadn't even waited until her 5 o'clock deadline. She was already putting the squeezins in me. Not Cora, Holt said over the phone. What do you mean? I brought my binoculars, Holt said. There's a 4th guy down there pointing out the property lines to the state boys, wearing a fancy cashmere sweater. Looks a lot like that brother of yours, Ryan. I hit the brakes, throwing the Subaru into a hard U-turn in the middle of the street. Tires squealed as I cut off a delivery truck, ignoring the blaring horn. Ryan hadn't waited for Adele. He hadn't waited for the board. The golden boy had panicked. He saw his inheritance tied up in a stalemate, and he decided to play the only card he knew about, trying to force me to capitulate by calling the state on my tank. tank. He didn't know about the Phase 2 report. He didn't know about the migrating plume. In his rush to save his own skin and break my hold on the water right, Ryan had just invited the government to test the soil directly adjacent to his $50 million vineyard. He had just pulled the pin on a grenade while standing in a room full of gasoline. I didn't care about the speed limit. I took the county backroads at 70, my old Subaru vibrating violently as I pushed it past its limit. The suspension groaned every time I hit a dip in the asphalt. I kept my foot pressed to the floorboard, my mind doing frantic, terrifying math. If the deck drilled those test wells today, they would have the soil and water samples by tomorrow morning. By tomorrow afternoon, the state would issue an emergency stop work order for the entire Valerius estate. Adele's $50 million vanity project would become a federally mandated hazard zone, and I would be holding the deed to the epicenter. I hit the gravel of my access road without braking, throwing a massive cloud of white dust into the air. I fishtailed around the bend and slammed on the brakes just as the North Ridge came into view. Holt's massive green tractor was idling near the tree line. 50 yards away, parked haphazardly on the scrub grass, were two white Ford Explorers with the state seal on the doors. Three men in neon yellow vests were unloading a heavy gas-powered soil auger from the back of the second SUV. Standing next to them, looking incredibly out of place in his designer loafers and cashmere sweater, was Ryan. He was pointing toward the slight depression in the earth where the old vent pipe was buried in the brambles. I threw the car into park, didn't bother shutting off the engine, and sprinted up the incline. My bad leg screamed in protest, a sharp white-hot stabbing pain shooting up my thigh, but I ignored it. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking over the rumble of Holt tractor. "Stop! Put that down!" The three deck workers paused, looking up at me. Ryan turned around, his face instantly twisting into a sneer of triumph. "Too late, Ethan," Ryan called out. He crossed his arms over his chest. "I told you. You don't play ball, we drop the hammer. I gave them the anonymous tip 2 hours ago. They're authorized to test the soil." I reached the group, breathing heavily, chest heaving. I ignored my brother completely and looked at the oldest of the three state workers, a guy with a gray mustache and a clipboard. "I am the sole title holder of this property," I said, pointing a finger at the ground beneath our feet. "I hold the deed. I did not authorize any state environmental testing. You are trespassing." The guy with the clipboard frowned. He looked at Ryan. "I thought you said Callaway Holdings owned this parcel." "We own the estate right next to it," Ryan said quickly, waving his hand dismissively. "He's my brother. It's a family dispute. He's just trying to cause trouble. The tank is right there. You can smell the diesel. Just drill the core." "Absolutely not," I snapped. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my hands shaking with adrenaline, and pulled up the digital copy of the county deed transfer. I shoved the screen into the inspector's face. "Read it, Ethan Callaway. LLC Blind Trust dissolved as of yesterday. This is private property. Unless you have a judge's signature on a warrant in that clipboard, you load that auger back into your truck and you get off my land right now." The inspector adjusted his glasses and read the screen. He let out a heavy sigh, the kind of sigh that came from a man who hated paperwork more than he hated pollution. He turned to his two guys. "Pack it up, Declan," the inspector said. "What?" Ryan stepped forward, his polished veneer cracking. "Are you kidding me? The leak is right there. You're the deck. You have jurisdiction over environmental hazard. Not without a warrant on private land when the owner is standing right here denying entry, kid," the inspector said, handing the clipboard to one of his guys. "We respond to anonymous tips to investigate." The owner said no. "Now it becomes a legal matter. I have to go back to the office, file an affidavit of probable cause based on the visible vent pipe and the smell, and request a court order." "How long does that take?" Ryan demanded. 48 hours. Maybe 72 if the judge is in a mood," the inspector said flatly. He looked at me, his eyes hard. "Don't try to dig it up and move it, Mr. Callaway. We have photos of the site. If it's tampered with when we get back, the fine's triple." "I'm not touching it," I said. The state workers loaded the heavy machinery back into the SUVs, slammed the trunks, and drove off down the dirt road, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. As soon as their taillights disappeared, Ryan turned on me. "You stupid, arrogant son of bitch," Ryan shouted, stepping into my space. The smugness was entirely gone, replaced by raw, panicked fury. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You just delayed the inevitable. When they come back with a warrant, they are going to fine you into the ground. Mom is going to buy this land for pennies, and you will have absolutely nothing." "Ryan, shut up and listen to me," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "You have no idea what you just did. You didn't just call the state on me. You called them on yourself," Ryan laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Right, nice try. I'm not the one with a leaking tank. No, you're the one with $50 million of vines planted directly on top of the groundwater plume," I said. Ryan stopped laughing. He stared at me, his brow furrowing. "What?" "Mom did a Phase 2 drill 3 years ago. She found the tank. She also found that the diesel leached into the bedrock and migrated south. It is sitting in the aquifer beneath the Valerius estate. Beneath your inheritance." I took a step closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. "She covered it up. She lied to the county, she lied to the zoning board, and she lied to Emery. And you just brought the state inspectors right to our property line." Ryan swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward the vineyard in the distance, then back to me. "You're lying. Mom wouldn't risk the estate. She wouldn't risk the Callaway name. She didn't think it was a risk because she assumed she'd eventually bully the old owner into selling, clean it up quietly, and nobody would know. But I bought it instead." I shook my head, feeling a bitter sort of pity for him. "You think you were putting a gun to my head, Ryan? You just handed the deck the ammunition to completely condemn the Valerius estate. If they come back here with a warrant in 48 hours, it's over for both of us." Ryan backed away, his expensive massive leather shoes crunching on the dead dirt. He looked pale, almost sick. He didn't say another word. He just turned, walked fast to his Porsche, got in and drove away. I stood on the ridge, the smell of old diesel thick in my nose, listening to Holt tractor turning the earth behind me. I had 48 hours before the state came back and blew my life and my family legislacy to ash. I drove back to my apartment. I needed to call Ren. I needed to see if we could somehow force Cora to buy the land and assume the liability before the warrant hit. I pulled into the peeling stucco parking lot, exhausted, my leg throbbing a dull, rhythmic ache. I walked up the concrete stairs to the second floor. As I turned the corner to my unit, I stopped. Sitting on the rusted metal chair outside my door was my father. Whitmore Calloway looked like a goat. He was still wearing a suit, but the tie was pulled loose, the collar unbuttoned. He hadn't shaved in a day or two, and his normally perfectly styled gray hair was windblown and messy. When I got closer, the smell hit me. Stale scotch and expensive cologne. He looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot. Dad, I said, keeping my distance. What are you doing here? I came to see my son, he said, his voice raspy. He tried to offer a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. Can I come in, Ethan? Just for a minute. I didn't want him in my sanctuary, but I also knew that Whitmore didn't do anything without an angle. If he was here, looking this defeated, it meant Adele's empire was fracturing from the inside. I unlocked the door and let him in. He walked into my small kitchen, looking around at the cheap laminate counters and the thrift store furniture. He didn't make a disparaging comment, which was the first sign that things were truly dire. He just leaned heavily against the kitchen island. Ryan called your mother, Whitmore said quietly, 10 minutes ago. He was screaming hysterically about a groundwater plume and a Phase 2 report. I set my keys on the counter. I had to tell him. He brought the deck to my property line. He was going to sink the whole estate. Whitmore rubbed his face with both hands. You found the old server log. Emery told us he saw you in the basement. Your mother didn't believe him at first. She thought her tracks were perfectly covered. Adele doesn't make mistakes, right? I said bitterly. Except when she builds a monument to her ego on a toxic waste dump. Ethan, please. My father looked at me, and for a second the politician dropped away. He just looked like a tired old man. You have to stop this. You've made your point. You showed us you aren't just the quiet kid in the basement. You won. This isn't a game to me, Dad. I'm not trying to win a point. I'm trying to survive. Whitmore reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick legal-sized envelope. He laid it gently on the laminate counter. I have $2 million in a private discretionary trust, Whitmore said, his voice dropping to a low, soothing cadence. It's clean money, untraceable to the current corporate account. It's yours. All of it. Cash out, Ethan. Give the deed to the 400 acres to the company. Take the $2 million and walk away. I stared at the envelope. $2 million. It was more money than I would ever see in my lifetime. It was enough to buy a real farm somewhere else, far away from Seneca Lake, far away from them. Why? I asked, my voice tight. Adele would never authorize this. She'd rather burn the company down than pay me off. Your mother doesn't know I'm here, Whitmore said, averting his eyes. He looked at the floor. And she doesn't know I took the money from the trust. A cold realization washed over me. What is she doing, Dad? What is Adele actually doing right now? Whitmore swallowed hard. He looked up, his eyes glassy. She's liquidating. The moment Ryan called her and told her the deck was 48 hours away from a warrant, she realized the Valerius estate was a total loss. And if the state finds out she hid the environmental report, they'll pierce the corporate veil. They'll come after Calloway Holdings' core assets to pay for the massive lake cleanup. So she's hiding the money, I said, feeling sick. She's transferring every liquid asset we have into offshore holding companies under maiden names and shell corporations. She's gutting Calloway Holdings from the inside out. Whitmore gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. By the time the state condemns the vineyard, the main company will be entirely bankrupt, an empty shell. I processed what he was saying. It was a classic ruthless corporate bankruptcy play, but there was a glaring hole in the logic. Wait, I said, my heart hammering against my rib. Adele just transferred the operational deed of the Valerius estate to Ryan yesterday. In front of the press, Whitmore closed his eyes. A single tear escaped, tracking down his weathered cheek. Yes, my father whispered. She did. If the main company goes bankrupt, I said, the horror of it dawning on me, and the estate is condemned, the liability doesn't fall on Calloway Holdings. It falls on the current operational owner. It falls on Ryan, Whitmore said, his voice breaking. She's setting him up as the fall guy. She's going to let the state destroy her favorite son so she can keep her fortune. I stared at my father, the silence in my cheap kitchen thickening until it felt hard to breathe. The politician was completely gone. The man standing in front of me was hollowed out, shaking, smelling of stale liquor and cowardice. He had known what Adele was planning. He had known she was going to feed Ryan to the state to protect her offshore account, and instead of stopping her, he had stolen $2 million from a side trust to buy his own absolution from the Stetson he had spent 28 years ignoring. Take the envelope off my counter, Dad, I said. My voice didn't even sound like my own. It was completely flat, drained of any anger. Whitmore flinched. Ethan, please. It's clean money. You can start over. You can go anywhere. I am anywhere, said, pointing to the peeling linoleum floor. I'm staying right here. Put the money back wherever you stole it from before she notices it's gone and throws you under the bus with him. You can't save Ryan, Whitmore pleaded, his hands hovering over the envelope. Adele has the best financial attorneys in the state executing these transfers. By the time the deck warrant clears tomorrow, Calloway Holdings Holdings will be a ghost. Ryan holds the operational deed. The state will seize everything he owns to pay for the remediation. Take the envelope and get out of my apartment. He looked at me, searching for a trace of the quiet, compliant kid who used to file his paperwork in the basement. He didn't find him. Whitmore slowly picked up the envelope, slipped it back into his breast pocket, and walked out the door without another word. I locked the deadbolt behind him. I walked over to the sink, splashed cold water on my face, and pulled my phone from my pocket. I dialed Ryan. He didn't pick up again. It went to voicemail. I typed out a text. A deal isn't fighting the deck. She's liquidating the main company and transferring the money offshore. Because she gave you the operational deed yesterday, the state is going to hold you personally liable for the toxic plume. She is serving you up. Meet me at Ren Drent's office in 20 minutes or you are going to prison. He didn't reply. But 25 minutes later, when I walked into the dry cleaners building and up the stairs to Ren's office, Ryan was sitting in the waiting area. He looked like he was going to be sick. Ren was behind her desk, drinking from a massive styrofoam cup of coffee, reading over the Phase 2 report again. She looked up as Ryan and I walked in. "Close the door," said. Ryan dropped into the chair across from her desk. He looked at me, his eyes wide and panicked. "Is it true? Tell me you're lying to scare me." "Whitmore just left my apartment," I said, taking the other chair. "He tried to pay me $2 million to walk away and keep quiet. Adele knows the deck is coming back with a warrant tomorrow. She knows the state is going to find the plume under your vine. If the company takes the hit, she loses her fortune. So she gave you the keys to a sinking ship and locked the doors from the outside." Ryan put his head in his hand. He let out a ragged, trembling breath. "She hugged me on the terrace. She told me I earned it. She told me I was the future. You were the human shield," Ren said bluntly. "She wasn't one for bedside manner. If you hold the operational deed when the state issues the emergency stop work order and the fines, the liability pierces right through to your personal asset. They will take your account, your house, your car, everything. And when that doesn't cover a $20 million lake cleanup, you'll be facing criminal negligence charges." "What do I do?" Ryan looked up, his face pale, the arrogant golden boy completely shattered. "I'll sign it back. I'll transfer the deed back to Callaway Holdings right now." "You can," Ren said, tapping her pen on her desk. "We can file an emergency quitclaim deed this afternoon, putting the estate back in the holding company's name before the deck warrant drop. But that doesn't solve the real problem." "Which is?" I asked. "If Adele successfully moves all the corporate money offshore by tonight, Callaway Holdings goes bankrupt the second the state hits them with the fine. The state will still condemn the land, shut down the estate, and auction off Ethan's 400 acres to cover the gap. We stop Ryan from going to jail, but Adele still wins. She gets away with the money, and you both lose everything." I looked at the Phase 2 report sitting on Ren's desk. I thought about Cora Wyndham sitting in that French cafe, telling me she would let the state crush me into insolvency just so she could buy my land for pennies. Cora didn't care about family loyalty. She cared about her bottom line. "A deal isn't just screwing Ryan," I said slowly. "She's screwing Cora." Ren stopped tapping her pen. "Say that again." "Cora Wyndham put $20 million into the Valerius estate as the anchor investor," I said, the pieces clicking together in my mind. "If Adele bankrupts the holding company and transfers the liquid assets offshore, Cora's $20 million gets wiped out in the bankruptcy. Adele is stealing from her primary investor to save herself." Ren's eyes lit up. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "That is massive financial fraud. If Cora Wyndham knows Adele is actively gutting the company, Cora can file an emergency federal injunction to freeze every single Callaway account, corporate and personal, pending an investigation into fraudulent conveyance. Can we prove she's moving the money?" Ryan asked, his voice shaking. "We don't need to," Ren said, pulling her keyboard toward her. "Cora just needs to show the court the hidden Phase 2 report and prove Adele lied on the investment disclosures. That gives Cora the grounds to freeze the board's asset to protect her initial investment. Adele won't be able to move a single dime. But Cora wants my land," I said. "She offered me a buyout this morning. If I give her this report, she has all the leverage." "Not if we make a deal before we hand over the paper," Ren said. She looked at me. "Are you willing to let Cora have the Valerius estate?" "I don't care about the wine," I said. "I just want my dirt." Ren picked up the phone. "Give me Cora Wyndham's direct number." It took 3 hours to negotiate the term. Ren handled the call, speaking a language of corporate ruthlessness that matched Cora's flawlessly. The deal was brutal but effective. I would send Cora the digital scan of the Phase 2 report immediately. In exchange, Cora would use her immense legal resources to instantly file a federal injunction freezing Adele's asset. Once the dust settled and the state got involved, Cora would buy the contaminated Valerius estate out of the inevitable bankruptcy proceeding. Because she was a new buyer stepping in to remediate a known hazard, the state would grant her leniency and subsidies to clean up the plume. As for me, Cora would drop the rezoning petition, pay for the quiet removal of the diesel tank on my ridge, and sign a 40-year commercial lease for the water rights at fair market value. I kept my 400 acres. I kept my farm. Ryan signed the emergency quitclaim deed, transferring operational control of the estate back to Callaway Holdings at 4:15 p.m. Ren drove it to the county clerk's office herself and slammed it on the desk 5 minutes before closing. The trap was set. The next morning at 9 a.m., the 48-hour clock expired. I didn't wait at the dirt road for the Dex SUVs to show up. Instead, Ryan and I walked into the glass-fronted lobby of Callaway Holdings downtown. We didn't need my old keycard. We walked straight into the elevator and hit the button for the executive floor. When the doors opened, the chaos was already absolute. Junior analysts were standing outside their cubicles, whispering nervously. The phones were ringing off the hook, but no one was answering them. Through the glass walls of the main conference room, I saw Emery pacing back and forth, rubbing his temples. Ryan and I walked past the receptionist, down the hallway, and pushed open the heavy oak doors to Adele's corner office. Adele was standing behind her massive mahogany desk. She was holding a phone to her ear, her face a mask of pale, rigid shock. Sitting in the two leather chairs opposite her desk were Cora Wyndham and a man in a sharp charcoal suit who looked unmistakably like a federal litigator. Adele slowly lowered the phone as we walked in. She looked at Ryan, then at me. For the first time in my life, there was no sneer. There was no condescension. There was only the hollow, cornered look of an animal that had just realized the trap had snapped shut. "Your offshore transfers just bounced, Adele," Cora said, her voice smooth and conversational as she sipped from a porcelain teacup she must have brought with her. "The federal court approved my emergency injunction 20 minutes ago. Every corporate and personal account tied to your name is completely frozen." Adele's hands were trembling slightly. She placed the phone on her desk. She looked at Ryan, trying to assemble the mask of the loving mother. "Ryan," Adele said, her voice tight but desperate, "they don't understand. Everything I was doing was to protect the family, to protect you." Ryan just stared at her. He looked older, heavier. "I signed the operational deed back to the company yesterday afternoon, Mom. It's fully executed and filed with the county. I don't own the Valerius estate anymore. You do." Adele staggered back half a step, the backs of her knees hitting her leather chair. She sank into it. "The deck is at the property line right now," I said, stepping forward. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I just delivered the reality she had tried so hard to avoid. "They have their warrant. They're drilling the test wells. By noon, they'll find the plume. By tomorrow, Callaway Holdings will be hit with the most severe environmental fines in county history. And because Cora froze your account, you can't run. You are going to sit here and pay for every single drop of toxic water in that bedrock." "You ruined us," Adele whispered, glaring at me with a hatred so pure it felt like physical heat. "You ruined your own family over a patch of dirt." "No," I said quietly. "You ruined yourself. I just stopped letting you use me as the rug you swept it all under." I didn't wait for her to scream. I didn't wait for the federal litigator to start reading the terms of the fraud charges. I turned my back on my mother, walked out of her office, and didn't look back. Ryan followed me. We rode the elevator down to the lobby in silence. When the doors opened, we stepped out onto the sidewalk. The city was bustling, people rushing to work, completely unaware of the empire that had just burned to the ground 10 floors above them. Ryan looked at the street, then at his expensive watch. He let out a long, slow breath. "What happens now?" he asked. "Cora takes the estate," I said. "Mom faces the fraud charges and the state fine. Dad probably runs to whatever state doesn't have an extradition treaty for white-collar theft. And you?" "I have a tractor waiting for me," I said. I looked at my brother. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was broke, unemployed, and deeply humbled. But as he stood there in the morning sun, stripped of the Callaway money and the Callaway expectations, he actually looked like a real person. "If you want to learn how to drive a seed drill," I said, "I have 20 acres of buckwheat that need tending." Ryan offered a small, hesitant smile. "I don't think I own any boots. You can buy some," I said. "I'll see you around, Ryan." I walked away, heading toward where I had parked my battered Subaru. 6 months later, the air off Seneca Lake was crisp and bitter with the coming winter. The Valerius estate had been completely fenced off, swarming with environmental contractors in white hazmat suits, paid for by the Wyndham Trust. The main tasting room was dark, the bronze founder's plaque removed from the terrace. Adele was tied up in a mountain of litigation that would likely outlast her natural life, and Whitmore was living quietly in a condo in Florida, carefully avoiding the press. I stood on the North Ridge. The old diesel tank was gone, excavated and removed by Cora's private crews under state supervision. The depression in the earth had been filled with clean, fresh topsoil. Down on the lower flat, Holt was running the heavy green tractor, turning the earth for the winter rye. Beside him, in a smaller secondary tractor, a guy in a worn canvas jacket and brand new work boots was clumsily but diligently pulling a set of discs through the rocky soil. Ryan was terrible at it, but he showed up every morning sick, and he hadn't complained once. I leaned against the hood of my Subaru, ignoring the familiar ache in my bad leg, and breathed in the smell of turned earth and cold wind. I didn't have a corner office. I didn't have a trust fund. I just had a lot of hard work and 400 acres of dirt. It was absolutely perfect.